Hello and welcome to the Blood Reds Daily News. My name is Ben Bocsak and I'm joined by my fellow Liverpool.com writer James Martin to talk a little bit about Naby Keita and the situation surrounding Manchester City. But first, let's talk about Naby Keita and his sort of situation. Obviously, his contract is expiring at the end of the season, and there's reports in Germany that Liverpool, unsurprisingly, I should say, are not going to extend that contract. What do you make of that, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could have got away with saying surprisingly or unsurprisingly. I could easily have seen it going either way. I suppose until very recently, it would have been a massive surprise to see him renew. He's been injured essentially the whole season. He's come back in the last few games, and at a sort of functioning club, which Liverpool has been until recently, you would say that there's no chance of him getting a renewal because of those, well publicised fitness issues which have dogged his entire Liverpool career. But then since he's come back, he's been one of the better midfielders. He is the only one in that age range. I think it's from sort of 22 to maybe 29 even. He's the only one who fits into that category. So, yeah, I mean, getting rid of him or maybe I should say letting him leave rather than getting rid of him, it does make the scale of that midfield rebuild even bigger in the sense that he will need to be replaced along with the older players who, as we know, need to be replaced as well or phased out, however you want to put it. Maybe Thiago can be sort of excluded from that, but he's had fitness troubles of his own. So yeah, it makes the task even more massive. But for the most part, you do have to look at it and say, yeah, it is the right call. We know that he can't escape these injury problems. The club has tried everything. They've hired new fitness coaches. That they've given him every opportunity to be the player that Liverpool thought they were signing, and it's very frustrating that that player has never been able to have a sustained run in the team, because even now when he plays, he looks like he has the potential to be the answer to so many of the problems. But yeah, it's not worked out how anyone wanted because of those injuries, and I think it's best for both sides to call it a day, and hopefully he does go back to the Bundesliga and resurrects his career there.
Yeah, I mean, when you say about that age range, is going to be turning 28 pretty soon, so it's quite close to that sort of bracket. And I suppose if you look at it from a sort of financial perspective, and also just from in terms of Liverpool needing to rebuild and how they're one of the oldest teams in the Premier League at the moment, you wouldn't necessarily extend the contract of a 28-year-old who has kind of been on the decline in terms of his fitness and form and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right to raise the financials as well. I suppose one side of that coin is that it's kind of worrying that Liverpool seem to be falling into this. It's maybe not quite a pattern yet, but there does seem to be slightly more instances of potentially sellable players being allowed to run down their contracts and leave for free. That's a little bit of a concern. But, you look at the amount you could get for someone like Keita, even if Liverpool, cut their losses probably not 3 years ago, but let's say 2 years ago, you wonder how much they get for him. Other clubs have that injury record available to them. It's not like they're going to be caught unawares by it. That will have had a massive impact on his price. His resale value has probably not really been that high at any point since Liverpool signed him for all that money. So yeah, clearly the decision's been made that getting an extra year or two of service out of him was better than trying to sell him on for a moderate sum at any stage in the last few years. And you look at last season, Keita did play a pretty big part. I mean, it's a shame he wasn't able to build on that this season, but the fact is Liverpool probably did get the better side of the deal by keeping him around. So I suppose I'm not too worried by that. But yeah, as you say, it would have made no financial sense really to extend that deal for longer. I think you're right as well. It's easy to look at someone who's 27, 28 and say they're in their prime, let's keep them. But, as soon as you extend them for any sort of long period of time, you're just signing up for the same problem we have now, but just again, a few years down the line. So, yeah, I think it's a shame. I really like Naby Keita. I think he's, when everyone's fit, which is the rarest of states at Liverpool at the best of times, he is in the best three in midfield for me. But yeah, it's one of them. It's nothing new that certain players have been unlucky with injuries. He's one of those, and yeah, Liverpool is just accepting that reality, really.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where he goes after Liverpool. You mentioned the Bundesliga. And I think that's probably where he'll end up. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him in France as well. Or I could see him playing for a Lyon type club. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. But moving on to the Manchester City situation, which kind of broke yesterday about them potentially being punished by the Premier League for the financial fair play breaching. I think I'm not quite sure, but there were plenty of breaches in the Premier League statement. I'm not sure about the exact number, but that was enough to be punished for. If they are found guilty, obviously all of this is alleged at the moment. What do you make of the situation? And does this, if City are found guilty, does this put a sort of new light, a new perspective into that Jurgen Klopp era and potentially even the Brendan Rodgers era as well? Because those breaches reach quite far down the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's in excess of 100 breaches that they've been accused of. Accused, possibly the wrong word, but those breaches the potential breaches have been put forward and essentially sent over now to that kind of independent panel. It's not been formed yet, but that's the next step in the process. Yeah, it's massive news for the whole of football, but it's hard not to think that it's particularly massive news for Liverpool in the sense that, particularly in that Klopp era, as you say, we have been the team that have been pushing Manchester City all the way. When they've won titles, we've normally been very, very close behind them. So, yeah, I mean, if all of these breaches, if even a handful of these breaches are found to have actually taken place, then it really does change the entire narrative of the last decade to 15 years, really, of the Premier League. In terms of whether it will formally change anything for Liverpool, you'd have to think it's unlikely. I think the best shot of that would be, oddly enough, the Brendan Rodgers year, 2013-14, because that is one of the years specifically under review, if you like. It's sort of arbitrary because obviously if City has been committing what essentially a decade-long campaign of financial doping, which is what this would amount to if the breaches were found, then naturally that would have a knock-on effect on later years as well. Because even if they've got their house in order and everything is by the books from sort of 2018 onwards, you look at those seasons and they're obviously tainted and tarnished by what came before. That's how they got to their position of strength. Obviously, I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm just saying if the breaches are all found, then that's the situation we're looking at. So, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it would be incredibly frustrating if they were found to have committed all these breaches, because in all likelihood, even if they were stripped of titles, they may not even go to Liverpool. That they may just be left void in those seasons. So you're just looking at a situation where it's a what could have been really, and what should have been rather than what could have been. Because if all of these breaches are found, Liverpool have been competing on a uneven playing field, and yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. If you look at the Klopp era specifically, what could have been won in that time? You're looking at 3 Premier League titles. You're looking at more cups as well. You can hark back to the 2016, I think it was, with that League Cup final. It would have been an even more silverware laden era than it has been. I mean, Klopp's won everything, so you can't be too upset about it. It's still been an incredible time to be a Liverpool fan, but yeah, it's quite hard to get your head around. Really, it's massive news. I don't think we'll know how this pans out for another many years to come. Really, in terms of the process, City can appeal not to the Court of Arbitration for Sport this time, but just to a newly constituted independent panel. So you'd imagine if they lost the first one, they would get straight on that appeal. We saw when they went to CAS that they were fighting every procedural point. They were dragging things out as much as they could. So yeah, I don't expect to see a conclusion to this story for a long time, but it's certainly an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that they were acquitted for the UEFA case anyway with the European Court of Arbitration for Sports. So, at this point, everything is alleged and nothing is for certain. But there were some Liverpool players who were sort of tweeting about it. I think Jose Enrique most notably, but I think Lucas Leiva as well, who were asking if they are now Premier League champions. And of course, you mentioned that 2013-14 season. That would also make Steven Gerrard a Premier League winning champion if these breaches are prove to be true. I mean, that would certainly cast a sort of completely different light on the Brendan Rodgers era, surely.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know how much it would change people's minds about Rodgers as such, but I mean, I would I would fully embrace an eventual decision whereby that title was awarded to Liverpool. I mean, our very own Emmett Gates caused a bit of a stir on Twitter yesterday by saying, would Liverpool really want those cardboard titles? And I think that the consensus was we absolutely would want those titles. Yeah, I think for me the biggest reason would be for Gerrard. I mean, I would 100% just embrace it as if we just won the title, recently, and get the parade out, get all the lads back together, get
I'm on
Gerrard on the
board. I'm
pitch.
on board. I'm on board. Absolutely. That's what I would do as well.
Yeah, I mean that would just be the most cathartic thing that could happen to any Liverpool fan. I think seeing Gerrard with the Premier League trophy, it looked like that dream was long gone. But if it could be resurrected even through these sort of inopportune circumstances, then yeah, I would absolutely take it. But as I say, I can't see it happening. But you never know. And it's interesting you mentioned the UEFA case as well, because obviously, as you say, they were cleared 2-1 by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But some of those charges were essentially time barred. There were things that couldn't be looked at. So, the word out of Manchester City at the moment is that they're sort of looking forward to the opportunity to clear their name fully, prove that they didn't get off on a technicality in front of CAS. But equally, one of the breaches that the Premier League has sort of charged them with now is essentially not complying with UEFA's financial fair play rules, which is quite interesting, because Premier League rules also require you to be in line with UEFA's rules. So all of that is essentially going to get retried, which will be very interesting because it's now being retried without the time bar, without various other procedural limits. So yeah, we'll get a more conclusive answer one way or another, which I think football needs, Liverpool needs. Yeah, so it'll be good to have some closure on this whole issue whenever it may come.
Yeah, it's just going to be one to keep an eye on probably for the next few years. Who knows how long this will drag on for, but it might be some time, like you said, until we get an actual conclusion to this whole case. I think that about wraps it up for today. Thanks, James, for joining me. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And as always, do check out the rest of the Blood Red content going out today and all the written content on liverpool.com as well.